Early dawn settled over the quiet city when an old man, curled up on a worn-out bench, suddenly collapsed forward. A faint golden glint slid across the pavement, catching the eyes of the few people passing through. An ambulance screeched to a halt, its red lights splashing harsh color across the narrow street, and there pulled from beneath the ragged blanket was a luxury briefcase and a bundle of vault keys. Someone whispered, voice trembling, "Wait, is he actually wealthy?" That single question would shatter the calm of everyone's lives. Henry had always been the same figure on the same bench, sitting with his shoulders curled in as if trying to hide from the world. People simply assumed he was homeless, and Henry never corrected these assumptions. Whenever he sensed pity in someone's eyes, he would turn away quietly, choosing silence over conversation. He disliked sympathy more than hunger itself. Amy, who worked at a small cafe nearby, didn't pay much attention to him at first, but seeing him every single morning, sitting alone before the sun even rose, began to chip away at her indifference. Her concern grew naturally, almost without her noticing. "Here, try warming up with this. Fresh muffin, just baked." She offered it gently, both hands wrapped around the warm paper bag. Henry, however, always responded the same way, a clipped tone, guarded and dismissive. "No, I don't need it." But underneath the firmness, Amy sensed a strange sadness, like someone refusing kindness not because they disliked it, but because they believed they didn't deserve it. His tone bothered her more each day. It wasn't the voice of a man who simply wanted to be left alone. It was the voice of someone following a rule that said accepting help would bring danger. That morning, Amy tried again, holding out a warm drink. "Are you sure you're okay? You look thinner lately." Henry's eyes flickered, and for the first time, he let out a weary sigh. "I can't get sick if I get sick. Then someone finds out." "Finds out what?" Amy leaned forward, confused. Henry froze. Then without another word, he pushed himself up from the bench and muttered, "Don't ask. Just let it go." The roughness in his voice couldn't hide the fear behind it. Amy watched him walk away, his steps unsteady, his shoulders trembling slightly, and the question she whispered to herself settled deep into her thoughts like a thorn. What is he hiding, and from who? After the ambulance drove away, the alley slowly slipped back into silence, but Amy's heart was still pounding inside her chest. She stared at the empty bench where Henry had been, then noticed a small slip of paper fluttering near the leg of the seat. It was a transfer receipt from the paramedics, a simple form, but the words on it made her frown. One black briefcase, one bundle of keys, one metal pen. Amy read the list twice. A briefcase for a homeless man, and a bundle of vault keys. In her mind, she saw Henry again in his worn-out coat, shoes with soles almost gone, pants thin to the point that the cold wind cut right through them. Everything about him screamed poverty, yet that flash of gold from his hand had been anything but cheap. She hesitated only a moment, before dialing the number printed on the slip. "Hi, I'm calling about the older man, who was just brought in from the bench by the main street." On the other end, the receptionist asked a few quiet questions, then replied, calm but slightly cautious, "Are you a family member?" "No, I just see him every day." "I was worried." "Is he alone?" There was a pause, long enough for Amy to feel her throat tighten. "According to the file," the receptionist said slowly, "he has no listed family, but there is something unusual among his personal belongings." Amy held her breath. "Unusual how?" "Well, we found documents for an old trust account, an address for a high-floor penthouse, and some papers with a major law firm's name." A chill slid down Amy's spine. The words homeless man and penthouse did not belong in the same sentence, yet here they were, colliding in her thoughts. Even after she hung up, her feet refused to stay still. Should I just ignore this? Or should I go and see for myself? But deep down, she already knew she'd made her choice. Amy untied her apron and tossed it onto a chair. "I'll be back soon, just need to check something." She called to her coworker, then headed quickly in the direction of the hospital. In the corner of her mind, Henry's earlier words echoed again and again. "I can't get sick. If I get sick then someone finds out." What was he so afraid of revealing? And to whom? The emergency waiting room buzzed with noise, but the corner where Henry lay felt strangely quiet, almost cut off from the rest of the hospital. Behind a thin curtain, his shape looked small under the white blanket, his worn-out life now wrapped in sterile fabric. Amy approached a nurse carefully. "Excuse me, the briefcase he came in with. Where is it now?" The nurse glanced at her from head to toe, her expression a mix of suspicion and caution. "You said you're not family, right? His belongings are in the security vault. No one can access them without proper approval." "I understand. It's just, he doesn't seem to have anyone. I thought maybe I could." Before she could finish, the waiting room door burst open. A man in a sharp suit, a middle-aged woman clutching an expensive handbag, and a young man with an unreadable face strode into the room with hurried steps. "Where is the patient named Henry Wilson?" The man in the suit held up some papers and raised his voice. "We are his family." The nurse's eyes widened slightly as she looked from them to Amy and back again. "According to his file, he has no listed relatives." The middle-aged woman twisted her face in outrage. "That's impossible. Do you know how many years ago we've been looking for him?" Amy instinctively took a small step back. "Family? Then why did the hospital say he had none?" The suited man leaned over the counter, his voice dropping into something heavy and threatening. "His belongings, especially the briefcase, that property belongs to our family. We need to see it immediately." "I'm sorry, sir," the nurse replied firmly. "Nothing can be released until his condition is stable and—" But before she finished, all three newcomers turned to stare at Amy. "And who are you supposed to be?" Caught in their piercing gaze, Amy's throat tightened for a moment. Then she steadied herself. "I'm just the person who brings him coffee every morning." The middle-aged woman let out a short, cold laugh. "So what? You think bringing coffee gives you the right to involve yourself in his personal property?" With that single line, the air in the waiting room grew tense and brittle. Amy felt her fingertips tremble, but her thoughts were sharper than ever. Are they really his family, or are they the ones he was so afraid would find out if he ever got sick? That evening, the hospital corridor felt even dimmer than before. Amy had gone back to the cafe for a few hours, but unease kept tugging at her mind, until she finally returned. As she approached Henry's room, muffled voices leaked through the door. "Once we get the vault code, it's over." "Yeah, and if we can get his signature on the papers, everything becomes legally ours." The suited man and the young man were standing just outside the room, speaking in low, urgent tones. The middle-aged woman stood with her arms crossed, her face twisted with impatience. "If that old man doesn't start acting reasonable, this could drag on," she muttered. Amy stopped dead in her tracks. Her heartbeat crashed loud in her ears. The young man glanced down the hallway, his eyes scanning the shadows. Amy instinctively pressed herself against the side of a vending machine. "Think anyone's listening? Relax. No one cares enough to listen at this hour." Only after they slipped into the room did Amy finally let out the breath she'd been holding. This isn't just some uncomfortable family argument, she realized. Her fingers tightened around the paper cup in her hand. A so-called homeless man, a penthouse address, trust accounts, and now talk about vault codes and signatures. It all twisted together into something dark. Part of her wanted to walk away, to pretend she hadn't heard anything. Getting involved could mean trouble, the kind that didn't let go easily. But another part of her, the part that had watched Henry sit alone every morning, refused to stay silent. "I can't just ignore this," she whispered to herself. Amy drew in a deep breath and knocked on the door of the nurse's station. "Hi, sorry, I think the people claiming to be his family might not be what they say they are." The nurse looked up, her face lined with exhaustion. "Families argue about money all the time. It's hard to judge based on just that, but they only talk about these things. Vault codes, documents, signatures. Not once did they ask about his condition." The nurse fell quiet, then slowly rose from her chair. "All right, I'll speak to security. Make sure only limited visitors are allowed in his room." Even with that promise, Amy's unease didn't fade. As she walked back down the hallway, she made a silent promise of her own. At the very least, Someone has to be watching over that old man. The next afternoon, when Amy returned to the hospital, the atmosphere in the hallway had shifted. A security guard now stood in front of Henry's room, and the suited man was voicing his complaints openly. What exactly did we do wrong? We're his family, just trying to check on his assets. Is that suddenly a crime now? The guard answered with a practiced calm. These are the doctor's orders. Until the patient's condition stabilizes, interaction must be limited. At that moment, Amy approached quietly, hoping to slip by unnoticed, but the middle-aged woman spotted her right away, and narrowed her eyes. Oh, it's the coffee girl again, the suited man smirked. Following him all the way to the hospital now, are you? Amy took a steadying breath, and replied as calmly as she could. I thought he had no one, so yes, I came, because I didn't want him to be alone. The young man let out a short, sharp laugh. Wow, that's some heroic spirit. What are you after? A feel-good story on the local news? Cafe worker befriends poor homeless man. The guard frowned at the remark, but the suited man leaned in closer to Amy, voice dropping to a low, warning tone. Let's be honest. Do you know what's inside that briefcase? Don't get greedy. When you're young, it's easy to let money blind you. You'll regret it later. I'm not. Before Amy could finish defending herself, alarms blared from inside the room. The heart monitor beeped wildly, and nurses rushed in, their footsteps pounding across the floor. His blood pressure is dropping, paged the doctor. Now, all eyes turned toward the open doorway. In that split second of chaos, the suited man shifted his weight, trying to peer into the room. Without thinking, Amy reached out and grabbed his arm. You can't go in right now. His gaze turned cold, like glass about to shatter. Did you just put your hands on me? The guard wedged himself between them. That's enough. The patient's safety comes first. There, in the middle of the hallway, greed, fear, and a stubborn desire to protect collided like opposing waves, each one threatening to crash over the other. The doctor rushed into the room, and the hallway tightened around them like a held breath. Amy stood near the doorway, hands clasped together, eyes fixed on Henry's still form. For a long moment, the only sound was the frantic beeping of machines. Then, slowly, the rhythm steadied. The doctor wiped the sweat from his forehead. He made it through the worst of it, he said, but he can't handle any more stress. No unnecessary visitors from now on. The suited man exploded. How are we unnecessary? We told you we're his family. The doctor remained calm but firm, until the patient confirms that himself. I can't accept anyone's claims. Just then, Henry's eyelids fluttered. It was a small movement, like an old window trying to open after many years ago. Mr. Wilson, can you hear me? The doctor asked. Henry drew in a rough breath, and slowly turned his head. His gaze drifted past the doctor, past the machines, to the hallway where Amy stood, and to the three strangers surrounding his bed. The suited man rushed closer, forcing a smile onto his face. Uncle, you're awake. We're here. You remember us, right? For a heartbeat, something hardened in Henry's eyes. He parted his dry lips, and spoke in a cracked but clear voice. I am not your uncle. Silence slammed over the hallway. Henry took another breath, this one deeper, more deliberate, and when he spoke again, his voice was steadier. And you are not my family. The middle-aged woman's face drained of color. Don't say that. You're confused. Your mind isn't clear. Henry lifted a trembling hand, cutting her off. Though the hand shook, there was undeniable strength in the gesture. My mind is very clear. I know exactly who you are, and what you've been doing, all these years. From the doorway, Amy watched a new expression form on his face. Not the distant, withdrawn look of the man on the bench, but the hard, steady gaze of someone who had endured far too much, and finally decided to stop running. And in that gaze, Amy understood something. The real story was only just beginning. Henry took a slow breath, and pushed himself slightly upright. The doctor tried to stop him, but Henry shook his head. I'm all right. There are things I need to say. Now, his gaze searched for Amy first. You there. You're the one who brings me coffee every morning. right? Amy's eyes widened. Yes, you remember me. A faint hint of a smile touched the corners of his mouth. Of course, a man doesn't forget. The few eyes that see him as more than a shadow. Then he turned his head toward the suited man, his expression cooling like stone. Those people are con artists. The security guard stiffened. The suited man snapped back immediately. That's ridiculous. You can't just. My name, Henry interrupted, is not Henry Wilson. He spoke clearly, each word deliberate. My real name is Henry Willard, founder of Willard Software, and still a major shareholder, with significant influence. The air in the room froze. Several years ago, I was surrounded by people who wanted my wealth, people I called family, and colleagues I thought I could trust. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with a dry, humorless chuckle. So I disappeared. I liquidated what I could, set up protections, and chose a quiet life under a different name. The middle-aged woman raised her voice. You disappeared on your own, and now you blame us for trying to find you. Henry cut her off like a blade. You weren't looking for me. You were looking for the money I left behind. He turned again to Amy. That's why I drew up documents. Most of my remaining assets are to be donated to shelters, support centers for the homeless, and small local communities. And I named one person as the executor of that plan. Henry lifted his hand, fingers trembling, and pointed directly at her. Amy Brooks, you. Her lips quivered. Me? You brought me coffee every single morning, without asking for anything, even when I refused. You came back the next day. If you were blinded by money, you would have torn into that briefcase long ago. Henry's gaze sharpened as he looked back at the three intruders. These people tampered with reports of my disappearance and tried to gain access to my accounts. They've been chasing my vault keys for quite some time. The expressions on the doctors, nurses, and security guards' faces shifted all at once. Now, the line between right and wrong, between greed and simple kindness, was finally coming into focus. That night, the familiar flash of blue lights washed over the hospital windows. The police had arrived, with the security guard's report, Henry's statement, and the records confirmed by the bank and law firm. The identities of the so-called family came to light quickly. Fraud charges, attempted document forgery, and evidence of trying to access a missing man's estate. As the handcuffs clicked shut, they kept shouting until the very end. If it weren't for us, that old man wouldn't have been treated like a human. What's the point of making all that money if you're not even going to spend it? Isn't that the real crime? But their words fell flat in the hallway, touching no one. Amy leaned against the wall, watching them being led away. Without saying a word, the security guard stepped over quietly. This couldn't have been easy, he said, but your courage played a big part in how this turned out. Amy shook her head. I just couldn't ignore it. All I did was tell you what I heard. That just, he replied gently, is something most people never do. A little later, the doctor called Amy aside. Mr. Willard is awake and asking for you. Would you like to see him for a moment? The room felt calmer now. Henry was looking out the window at the dark sky. When she walked in, he turned his head slowly. Well, he said softly, I suppose there's nowhere left for me to hide. Amy gave a small, careful smile. Maybe, you don't need to hide anymore. Henry let out a long breath, one that seemed to carry years ago of weariness with it. You're right, he murmured. Maybe it's time. I tried trusting someone again. His gaze warmed, losing some of its old distance. And it's a relief that the first person I trust is you. That night, the line between good and evil was drawn clearly. Greed walked away in chains, and quiet kindness stood revealed as the force that had protected a life. A few months later, in a bright conference room overlooking the city, sunlight poured in through wide windows. Freshly printed documents lay neatly arranged on a long table. Once you sign at the bottom, everything will be finalized, the attorney said. Henry picked up the pen, then paused to look at Amy. Are you sure about this? It feels like I'm placing a heavy burden On your shoulders. Amy shook her head with a gentle smile. You're not dumping it on me. We're doing this together. If it were just me, I'd never have the nerve. The title on the document read, Establishment of the Willard Foundation and Homeless Support Fund. As Henry signed, he murmured, all those years on the street. Turns out they weren't completely wasted. The people I met out there taught me exactly where this money needs to go. Amy glanced out the window and said softly, that bench, that alley, they'll feel a little less lonely now. A few days later, a local TV station came to interview them. The man everyone thought was homeless turns out to have been a hidden millionaire, the reporter said excitedly, and he's decided to give his wealth away to those in need. But Henry shook his head. Millionaire or not, that's not the point, he replied. What matters now is that this money reaches people who were like the old me, sitting on cold sidewalks with nowhere to go. He added quietly, and I'd like people to remember that it all began with one person who brought me a cup of coffee every day without expecting anything back. After the cameras were turned off and the crew had left, Henry and Amy walked back to the familiar alley. They stopped in front of the old bench. Are you going to sit here again? Amy asked. Henry smiled. Maybe for a moment, but not for long. This place isn't my hiding spot anymore. A light breeze passed by, tugging gently at their hair. The bench, once a symbol of escape and invisibility, had become something new, a quiet starting line for people ready to stand up and walk forward again. Thank you for staying with us until the end. We'll be back with an even better story next time. Your support, subscribes, likes, and notifications means the world to us.